Now, I'll start out with what John Hirschberger told me. He said, even if I do very poorly on this, you guys will still love me. So we're going to try. I'll try to do good, but I'm not sure. My Bible verse is, "The earth is full of the goodness of the Lord," Psalm 33:5. And my title is God's Goodness in Hard Times. Starting out, Ike and Viola Thornburg were my parents. I have a brother, Spencer. We lived in my Thornburg grandparents' farm south of Winchester on the Huntsville Road. My dad farmed the land with his horses and mules. We went to the big Nazarene church in Winchester where my Pickett grandparents went. My Thornburg grandparents were going to move back to their farm where we were at. My parents found a farm in Bear Creek land. We moved when I was in 3rd grade and Spencer was in 5th, way back in 1952. A creek ran between our house and barn. Bear Creek ran through our woods, and Spencer and I had a small boat on the creek close to Leroy Barnes' ground. We soon started coming to Bear Creek Friends Church, and I love coming here, and I still do. Roy Huffman was our pastor. His family was some of our relation. We soon felt at home here. My mother played the piano, and my dad, he was involved in church, but not in music. Back then, there were no inside restrooms, and there was an outhouse back in there, way back in there. And I remember Lana Chalfett and I making a trip to the outhouse out back. I also remember Bear Creek holding a revival. I went to the altar and a small seed was planted. I have failed the Lord many times, but he doesn't give up on me. God keeps chipping away on me, and I am so thankful of that. One evening at milking time, I took the cat pan down to the creek, and I was going to wash it out. Maybe I was, 10, 11, not sure. And there was a joy that came over me, like the song, Joy Unspeakable. When I went back to the barn, my mother could see this in my face, and I didn't really tell her what had happened, but I've never forgotten it. A few years later, I became Bear Creek's janitor. Really, my mother and I were janitors, only I got the money. Yeah. I wasn't old enough to drive, and even if I was, Mother didn't want me here by myself. One Sunday morning, church was canceled because of big snow drifts. The heat was on here at church. We didn't have a 4-wheel drive, but we had horses. Spencer and I rode Mike nearly 2 miles to Bear Creek so I could take care of the heat. Mike was a big draft horse, a workhorse, and we rode bareback. I had to get off to take care of the heat. How did I get back on Mike? I think I know. I'm not telling. As the years went by, there was a young man here at Bear Creek that became interested in me. His name was Lynn Hirschberger. Now, something interesting, today, November the 6th, he would have been 82 years old. He's been gone 41 years, and he lived 41 years. His family were Bear Creek people. And you know his younger brother, John Hirschberger, his sister, Kay Lackey. Lynn and I married. Roy Huffman married us. Cindy and Sandy Chalfant were our little flower girls dressed in blue with white gloves. Lynn and I began a new life together. This was a big change in our lives. We had a very small trailer at Lynn's parents'. So I was getting familiar with Lynn's family. We were still there when Cynthia, our first, was born. I think she had only 2 nights in the trailer, and we had more change. Lynn worked at Fraser's Supply in Union City as a clerk, and they wanted him to be a salesman out of Newcastle. We lived with my folks for a month and then found a little house in Newcastle. That job Lynn did not like. Another move to Saratoga in a small pink house. Lynn worked at Westinghouse in Union City. No, that was not a job he liked. And we added 2 more kids to our family, Carrie Lee and Christina Kay. Another move for us, and a place in Union City, and a mostly new home. And that's another story. I lived there 21 years. I knew what Lynn wanted to do. He wanted to be a truck driver. And Lynn's dream, it was not mine. This had been discussed before we got married. Well, Lynn bought a semi. He and his dad were both taking loads to California, each driving their own truck using the company flatbed trailers. Lynn was up the street. He and a mechanic were getting his semi ready for his first trip. My dad came and said that my mother had just passed away with a heart attack. She had been Christmas shopping in Winchester. Oh my, I'm not only losing my mother, but I'm losing Lynn to the road. Cynthia had just turned 4. Carrie would be 3 in a few days. Christina would be 2 in the spring. After the funeral and then Christmas, Lynn and his dad did leave. Here's how the trips worked. They would take these loads to California, and then from there try to get another load close by that would take them somewhere else, and so it went. On this job, there were no regular routes. They went all over United States. Lynn might be home in a couple of weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, or even longer. You just never knew. I did not realize it, but during this time, God had me in training. Yes, the kids and I still came to Bear Creek Church, but it seemed like when the big, tough things happened, Lynn was home. And that was God's goodness. Now we're going to fast forward several years. Cynthia graduated from high school and she went to Fort Wayne Business College. Carrie was a senior in high school and Christina a junior. Lynn called me and he said he wanted me to fly out to Oklahoma. He really needed me. I said, well, I don't want to leave the kids, and I have Christmas shopping to do. He said, well, we can Christmas shop out here, and we'll be home for Christmas. Now, he had been home a while before and found out he was a diabetic. He was on insulin, and it wasn't going so well. I stayed home. I didn't fly out, and I have to live with that. On December the 14th, 1981, in the evening, I got a call from a Houston, Texas hospital saying Howard Hirschberger had been in a bad accident and was in a coma, and my mind is racing. Howard? Well, that's not my Lynn. Well, Lynn's name was Howard Lindley, and hospitals are big on first names. Things back here at home got very crazy. There were phone calls and plans to be made. Things began to fall into place. Kim Mills, our pastor, and John Hirschberger would fly to Houston with me. Thank you, Lord. Airports give me fears. Carrie and Jesse went after Cynthia at Fort Wayne. My suitcase was packed, and we would be leaving in the morning. I will be leaving my kids. How will they get along? I surely won't be gone more than a week. I just can't. John is leaving Marlene and the girls. She will have the hogs to take care of, and we're in for some really cold weather. Kim will be leaving Michelle and Dawn, but I'm so thankful for Kim and John coming with me. When we got to Houston, we took a taxi ride to Herman Trauma Hospital. It was a white knuckle ride, and I'm telling you, I'm sure John remembers. Yes, yes. I do too. It was awful. Lynn's folks were already at the hospital. They had been in Oklahoma. We were taken up to ICU. Lynn was on a breathing machine. He had a pressure bolt in his head that was taking pressure off of the brain. His leg was badly broken, which required surgery, a metal piece and screws keeping the bones in place. It was my nature to faint. John knew I would, but I did not. And thanks for the prayers being said. We talked to his doctor, and he said his brain had been shaken as you would shake an egg. He said we should know more in 3 days, hoping to get some kind of response. The accident did not involve his semi. He was walking across the highway and was hit by a car. How could this happen? Lynn was so careful. Well, we needed a place to spend the night. I think there were 6 of us there for Lynn. We got 2 rooms at the Flamingo Hotel. I want to tell you another one of God's goodness. Houston is a big city. Lynn's dad knew how to get around in Houston, and that was a tremendous blessing. We got another place to stay. It had a small kitchen. On day 2, I was calling back home to Walker's funeral home, making some sort of a plan. On day 3, The doctor could not see any improvement in Lynn. Lynn's mother was such a blessing. It was easier for her to talk to the doctor. The doctor was very negative. Also, she would call the hospital in the mornings to find out how Lynn's night went. And I had trouble doing that. It's looking like Lynn is not progressing very fast. A week is not going to get him well. How are the kids doing back home? This is a time before cell phones, and I do not call home that often. Somehow they are handling this. Cynthia comes home on weekends and takes care of business, and I don't really know what all. Carrie drives to school, taking Christina and maybe a neighbor or two. Several friends bring food in for the kids. They made it through Christmas, no presents from us. It wasn't good, but it was the best we could do. As we got less family and friends here in Houston, Howard went after their camper in Oklahoma. There was a trailer park close to the Astrodome. This was okay for a while. Lynn was not getting better. In a short time, he had a staph infection, which he never got over. That meant we robed up in yellow paper gowns and the mask and the gloves. I wonder if the kids remember the yellow gowns. Yeah. And we could not have a visit with Lynn whenever. I think it was 3 times a day, maybe 15 to 20 minutes a visit. Lynn required more surgeries. He had been weaned off of the breathing machine, but with each surgery, he was put back on the machine and then weaned off again. He had a trach put in, a feeding tube. He had infection in his hips, which required surgery. He was fitted with a soft mouthpiece so he wouldn't bite his mouth. I think he had dentures on top, so when you're in a coma, you tend to clench your teeth together. Later, he got a bad blood infection, but he pulled through. And that was a night that we spent in the hospital waiting. Always when we were in his room, we would keep talking. This was very important. Lynn could hear. Lynn got a bed sore. I didn't know a bed sore could be so big and so bad. Finally, he was put on a bed that was flat, and it was for burn patients, and it had sideboards on it. And this bed would just slowly tilt from one side to the next, continually doing that. This bed took the pressure off of any one point. It gave the bed sore a chance to begin to heal. Before Kim Mills left, he had a special time with Lynn. He got to speak to him about his soul. Kim got a definite hand squeeze from Lynn. This was a comfort. We got into special housing that were meant for families involved in the nearby hospitals. There were a lot of hospitals in this area. This was more room than the small trailer. In this apartment, Mother Jane did the cooking and I did the cleaning, and that was a load off me. Now, more of God's goodness. John brought the kids down. This was good for them, and it was good for me. And I don't know how many trips John made with family, bringing family. We also had Oklahoma family to come, and it was so good to have company. And I didn't mention there was an A-frame church just outside the hospital doors, and that was a favorite spot for me. Mother Jane, she loved talking to the women that were going through family trauma. One thing I loved so much was the zoo, and it was just across the street. It cost nothing. It was a beautiful zoo, and it had all kinds of animals. We saw baby hippos swimming underneath the water. We went to museums, all part of God's blessing. There was a beautiful rose garden. Wednesday evenings, I would think back to Bear Creek prayer meeting and think, they're praying for us. You know, I love rocking chairs. The folks surprised me with a lawn chair that rocked. I had cats outside the apartment. I always have cats, and I do. I got to go home a few times during the 7 months. I was home for Carrie's graduation, for Cynthia and Jesse's wedding. Also, the folks got to go home. I was never left in Houston alone. Now we have a problem. How about Christina being left at home by herself? Carrie will be going to Lincoln Tech in Indy. Jesse and Cynthia are married. Debbie Taylor was making plans. She had a doctor in the family. He was at Grandview in Dayton. It worked out that he would take Lynn. Back at Herman Hospital, Lynn had to be able to make the trip. Most of the time, he was not. I prayed that he would have no more crisis, and that became so. He made the trip in a Learjet with a special nurse, and also his mother flew with him. Family was waiting. Now remember, Lynn had staph infection, so everyone had to be kept safe, and that involved quite a bit. This was in July. His folks and I alternated days in going for visits. My last visit with Lynn, Christina went with me. She went out of the room, and it was just Lynn and me in the room. I had a daily bread. I was reading to him. Lynn changed. I had never seen him like this in the 8 months that he was in a coma. It was like he was wanting out of that bed. His face was scrunched up like he was crying. Was he trying to tell me something? Was he coming out of the coma? I could only guess. Next evening, Mother Jane and Kay were there. Lynn passed away while they were there. He had phlegm that the nurse could not get suctioned out. I was surprised because of yesterday's visit. I felt like I couldn't handle losing him. I was a widow for 7 years, and then Guy Baldwin happened in my life. Now, even in all the hard times, God had blessings for us. Thank you.